Okay guys, and here we are in Logic. Now, you may notice the project looks different to how it did last time. The reason being I recorded this whole video for about 40 minutes and I can't open the file. So instead, we're just gonna go over what I've done and what I've added and what I've changed and just recover it for you guys. So essentially, you remember in the last video, we were looking at replacing the kick because we had used some samples. I'm going to give the project away to you and we needed to make it all ourselves. So we've renamed that up here as kick sin and we've just duplicated it and ran it right the way across. So we've just got this guy here. And you'll notice that the actual sample is no longer in the project as well, or at least you can't see it. So I've used the hide function. So you'll notice here up by solo, we've now got H in orange. And if you tap H on your keyboard, assuming you've left the default link, it will hide some tracks for us. And I've hidden away the snare and kick there because we're no longer using them. Because yes, we are going to replace the snare as our next thing. So the snare we had initially was again taken from the same break, but we cut them away so we could re-level some bits. And that's this guy here. Now I've replaced it with something a bit different that's got a bit more body to it and some more white noise. But essentially the same feel, right? Just a fair bit louder. So you notice the kick and snare here, they're both muted as well. So when we tap H and they disappear, they don't play back. So the way we've created our snare, we've used two different sections here. So as you can see, I've labeled snare white and snare fund. Now snare white is really simple for us to do. So we can just add a new channel by clicking on plus up here. And I used Ultra Beat. And within Ultra Beat, I've just used the actual default sample in here for the snare and just use the white noise from it. So when we double click on our piece of audio here, or our piece of MIDI information, sorry, you can see that in the Ultra Beat section, we've got snare 3 here. I've not really made any changes. I've just used that as a layer there. So that's really easy for us to put in. However, the fundamental snare, and the reason I call it the fundamental snare is it's got our body and the fundamental sound, which is going to sit around 200 Hertz. I've made that using Alchemy. It's not a particularly complex patch, but like before, we can default our patch by going to File and then Initialize Preset. If we have a look on Global, we can really see what's going on. So if we select Master Volume, you can see I've got this very short decay here, which is just that real snap. Yeah, so it's just dissipating really, really quickly. There's a bit of a roll off in the sound, isn't there? That's because we're using some reverb on it, the same reverb we used on the sample initially. So we're using 3 different oscillators. So if we have a look at oscillator A, this is our default one, and it's literally, we're just running that sine through. And if we bring up an EQ here, we can see that when we play it back, we've got this real fundamental here around 200 Hertz. It's actually going to be a bit lower than that. It's probably about 198. Now, that is relevant to our track. So when we trigger a sound in Alchemy, we can trigger a particular note. And here I'm triggering on the G, right? So it's giving us a relevant fundamental to our track, but it's also right around the frequency you'd expect a snare drum to be. That's all this does. It generates a sine at that area for me. Oscillator B does the same thing, but is, or it was, up 9 semitones. So if we go to global, let's disable B and C. Cool, so you can see that's just making that fundamental there. Now we bring B in. Of course, it's giving like the body of our snare, right? And then C is giving the noise of it. So C is probably the most interesting, what we've done here to make that work. Taken the oscillator itself off, introduced noise. We've then low cut, same as before, to sort of 224 kind of region. Just taking the low end out really. A little bit of a high cut, because you don't really need the glimmering highs in there in this particular sound. The real focus is like that sort of 1 through to 5K, maybe up that high region. That's where your real focus is. And then what we've done here is applied a filter to it, and we've used the bandpass with 12 dB slopes, the edgy version, and driven it massively. That's what gives us all this all this high frequency content up here. Like that. Right? Get rid of it. It's just the body and fundamental. And I've not done anything fancy with ADSR here. I've just used the overall because it's working okay with the white snare together. And that's made our snare. Like, pretty simple way to do it. I think I'll do some other videos on like using FM and whatnot to make snares, but that's how we've done it in this. It got us the process we needed, and we did it just using stuff from Logic. So now we've got these guys driving our track. And then with the other kicks that come in. Cool. So let's just get a feel for the whole of that as a track now we've replaced them. Cool, and you'll remember that we took the samples and we pitched them up and made those little like snare flurries at the end. We've done that using just the Alchemy version because that has the fundamental. That's the thing that is really latching onto for harmonic content. We've just run it up here at the end of the 8 bars, and that just gives us our little flair. Simple as that. Sweet. So what I looked at next was then the Reese section here that comes in, and hopefully you can hear there's quite a difference there. And what I've done here on the Reese, if we highlight it, you can see it's now got a bus, and it's going off to this bass bus here that we've just labeled bass dist because we've really over distorted it. So we're running that in parallel, and they then both go into the bass bus. So if we were to do this, we've got the Reese, the Reese's little bus that's going off to the distortion, and the sub all in here. Now if we mute that distortion section, big difference, right? So what I wanted was some stereo going on to like spread it a little bit, and some actually horrible little lashy noises that pop up and just catch the ear for a second, but we've controlled them enough that they don't really stand out so much and affect the track. Cool, so they're just reinforcing what's going on. And I've done that in parallel for a reason, so we can just keep the original sound as it is, and if we wanted to, we could just mix it here. What I've actually done is blended it here to a level that I liked using the bus, and then I've actually brought it down by 11 dB on the mix as well. Now, just to explain the chain a little bit, let's get rid of the others, and let's mute sub. So we'll make sure we have just got the Reese in. Cool, so we've just done a little bit of overdrive, and I've done this to add a little bit of extra high content. We've then got distortion 2, and I've put this on the class AB and driven it quite hard. This gives us a lot more overtones. Now this is then adding quite a bit of boxiness and some unwanted areas. So we've got an EQ going in from there, really controlling out these areas. You'll notice I've been really specific in what I've grabbed And if you reverse them, you'll hear why. Cool, so they're like really boxy, unwanted frequencies. So we've nailed those and taken them right out, giving it a little bit of a high-end lift, and just crushed out anything we didn't want. I've taken out all of the low end because I don't want it interacting with the actual Reese too much. I just wanted to add more mids and high-end content. And then it gets a bit wild and out of control having all of this going on. So we've limited it, but I've limited it really hard. So we're reducing it by 9 dB, we're pushing it by 10. So there are times when it really fluxes, it's getting limited quite hard, sort of like 3-4 dB there. But then we're bringing it right down in the mix anyway. It's just there for an effect. It's almost like using it as its own room or amp and giving it a feeling, like a sort of, you're giving that Reese a space of its own and a character of its own, just to really add some flair to it. And the sub takes control of everything else for it to sit on top and ride, right? So what we then did from there is we copied our track. So in your particular production, you might want to add some variation in the second section or build it out differently, or give yourself a 16 bar where I've done only a middle 8. But a really important thing we did here, we just selected this whole portion of the track like so. Made sure we had all the elements included, and we've just copied that over. Now, a really important setting for us when we copy over, we have to go into Logic and Preferences, and then we need to go into Automation. We need to make sure this Move Track Automation with the regions is either set to Ask or Always. So if we set it to Never, we'll run into issues where we've created automation for our white noise sweeps and they won't come over. So once we've done that, we can copy it over and check we've got a nice smooth transition from one part into the next. To loop and transition nicely. So that worked out well for us in that respect. Now, right at the end, we made some changes as well. We've introduced a really quick outro. What we've done here is just brought the cymbal sweep right up at the end that was here. We've dropped the crash right at the end. And we've taken some chords. We've taken the first chord and the last chord of the progression. It doesn't have to be those, but that's what we've done in this instance. And I've just elongated these last two notes just to really fade out. So we get the start and end of the chord progression sort of as a signifier, and then it just drags out those last couple of notes. Now that only brings our track to 2 minutes 8 seconds there right at the end. So it's not a full D&B track. You could actually loop this again. You could have much longer breakdowns. You could even double up on these verse sections if you wanted to, and have maybe a third section brought in there, or extend them. Like, be as creative as you want to be with it. So in this second drop, I would maybe add some extra elements or remove elements entirely to give it a different feel. If I had a vocalist, I might have this as a instrumental section and then strip this out and have a nice vocal section here and then go back to something else. Just be creative with whatever it is you want to do in that respect. So we've given ourselves a nice structure. We've got a nice little 2-minute piece written out now. What we are going to do next is get ready to mix it. So I've created all these buses. Now, if you remember, as we went along, I was organizing in sort of order of priority. And we've got our kick running right through to our crash here with everything that's drum related. So if we hold shift, we can highlight all of those together. Now, the reverse crash, I would generally put into an effects bus, but I'll keep it up there with drums because it tends to be relevant to the other crashes that occur. So this whole section, we can highlight like that. If we then click here where it would be stereo out, we've then sent that to bus 11 and we renamed bus 11 drums. So we can now solo this section out and we're always going to have all of our drums. We've already done that with bass. And then we did it with instruments as well. So we've taken the piano and the arp. As well as the choir section. All into one bus there. And then we've done an effects section, which in this case, it just includes our white noise sweeps and our reverse hi-hats. Hi-hat, ride cymbal, whatever it was in the end. And then lastly, one that many people won't do, but I do, is I have verbs. So any reverbs I've used, I actually bust together at the end. And the reason I do this is, one, I can mix them all in one idea, and as well as I can check for any problems. So reverb in drum and bass can absolutely be a problem causer. So I tend to just put an EQ on there, have this little reverb bus, and I can play a track back and I can actually see what's going on with any of the reverbs, right? It shows me all the tracks are highlighted, look, that go to the reverb. I can hear what's going on. If I suddenly see like a big wavy low end bit here going, I've done something wrong. I think there was a point where it happened as well. Cool, so I probably don't need all that low end stuff happening there. Now, the instance it occurs, I could probably get away with right here on this build up. But that's probably going to cause some phasing issues. I now know it's there because I've made this bus. And equally, I can just treat all the reverb spaces as one and get an idea for them. Don't have to do it, it just helps me and the way I work, just something I've built into. So that's us getting ready for mixing. And in the final video, I'm going to really go over trying to bring the best out of the sounds and getting it all balanced and mixing it together. But let's just have a little playthrough for 2 minutes of what we've built together. Cool, so I'm pretty happy with that as it's come together so far. So the very last video, which is going to be next week, guys, will just be going over mixing and really getting this track to sound the best we can get it to sound, and a few techniques I'll use and processes along the way. It's likely to be a very long video, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you then, guys.